morning. This is a continuation on from previous days of footage. You don't need to see them in order to continue with today's footage. Just trying to record some high dynamic range PC gaming. I am of the belief that the titles that are using the ray tracing have more of a benefit by being in high dynamic range than possibly the benefit of actually adding the ray tracing in the first place. And Ghostwire Tokyo is a pretty good example of that, in that the game itself, when you turn on all the ray tracing and you look at a street scene at night, and as someone that grew up in a capital city with some of the neon districts, they're bright and they're confusing. And to make sense of a street scene at night when everything's so lit, it's engaging for the brain. It's amazing. And this is very true. And so of this game, when you put it in the HDR mode, so it's just loading up. I'm just going to look down at the street so we can watch the mist kick in. There we go, and all the light passes. Okay, fantastic. So what I found is that when this game renders in HDR mode, it's very playable. The brain can actually make sense of all the lighting, and it just works. And so this is an example of a game that I feel that certainly the HDR makes more of a difference than the ray tracing. Now that is true for quite a few titles. At any time you start playing with HDR, you start to realise that colour and contrast is more important than resolution. What lets me absorb? I feel like I've done something. There we go, up there. So yeah, this is just a bit of a recording test. Now that being said, I'd started recording it yesterday in between some, probably Hogwarts and The Witcher, both in ray tracing. And I was trying to capture them in HDR to show off some of the benefits of the light reflecting on the hilt of Geralt's sword, how impacting it actually is. Once it's in HDR mode, it actually works. The screen feels 3D. And while I jumped in and out of this one, it actually crashed. And it's just that I'm running my video card at 100 millivolt less power than it needs. Because I put less power into it, it runs cooler. Because it runs cooler, I can overclock it more and run it at faster speeds. And so there is a little bit of a balance there, which is what I'm trying to achieve. And so in a game like this, finding that right balance is what it's all about. And it took me a little while, but I got there. And so Fluid Motion Frames 2 is essentially what I'm trying to show off in a few of these titles. I say show off, I just mean that for all the games on my computer which I can brute force, basically 4K 60 in just about every title, with the exception of the ray tracing titles, where if I want to make them ultra everything, the frame rates, certainly in some of the latest and greatest games, and this is a 10-year-old computer with a 4-year-old video card, but in the latest and greatest games, I generally need to run them with all the ray tracing on it. If I'm going for 4K level of resolution, 30 frames a second is a good cap, otherwise the video card can really keep running hard. And I like cool gaming or quiet computing. So not right now, I've sort of put an extra bit of an overclock on just to render this. But as I was playing Borderlands yesterday, by dropping a couple of, from 2550 megahertz to 2500 megahertz, saved me about 30 watt of power draw. It just meant the fans could run absolutely quietly while playing, which is how I tune for when playing. But look, it's nice to have the leeway in the headroom, and that's what I'm finding this Fluid Motion Frames 2 has allowed. And the few titles that were ray tracing and just pushed my rig too hard, the Fluid Motion Frames has turned them into perfect games. Absolutely perfect. But PC as an ecosystem is very weird. Case in point is this game. Probably one of the worst games. I bought it on the console, and of the 12 different display modes, the ones that have been set by default weren't ones that anybody would set. The turning speeds and all the control options by default are not options that any human being would want to play with. And I found it took me quite a bit of game tuning just to make the game turn and just behave the way I would want a video game to work. It was evident that the team who built it might have understood how to make video games, but they didn't understand what makes gaming fun, or they didn't understand how to build a game that people would want to interact with. I don't know. It just came across as a game that they didn't want to sell. Now, they don't exist as a company anymore, but they'd been acquired midway through a project by a parent company that technically owns PC gaming, but doesn't make any money in the PC gaming space. They have to sell consoles if they want to turn any profit whatsoever, because there they get the sale of licensed peripherals drive storage expansions, every single software that the title sold in their shop, they get a part of the profits from. There is a reason why the big companies like to own, to build video game console platforms, and you don't need to own first-party software titles. You only own first-party studios, so you've got some software to launch when you launch the console, and then you don't need to build any more games, right? And that's always been the way consoles are. The first-party studios are just to have some software on launch. Then the parent of the console doesn't have to make games anymore. The platform exists for other developers to write games for it and improve and keep selling stuff. So I think it's news at the moment that Sony's not making games anymore, not focused on making games, and that's not news. That's just standard console affair a few years into any given platform. But look, the media is not pro certain companies. Anyway, this is working well, so I'm really glad to see that. But my rant and rave was going to be about the anti-consumer practices of the parent company and how they just destroy PC gaming as a platform, and I just couldn't believe it. Like, the Switch Pro controller is the nicest wireless controller to use on a PC. Better than an Xbox controller, better than a PS5 controller. Just a really nice controller. And you see, if you ever try to use a PlayStation controller with a PC, you see limitations, you see issues, the vibration being rough, and just stuff like that. But you use a Switch Pro controller, and if it goes to sleep, like, enjoy disconnecting, like, enjoy going through the whole process of repairing it, and it wasn't that way when it first came out. It's like one of those things that forced driver updates. It just made the product being completely unusable to the standard person. So it is a shame. Like, by the time I was ready to record, my controller had gone to sleep, so I literally had to go back into Windows and delete it and re-add it just to make it work. Again, it wasn't an issue when the Switch Pro controller first started working with PC. It was the best controller, and Microsoft hadn't given it a driver update to break it, and it was very usable. But look, here's just an example of footage on a game that nobody ever really bought into, and for legitimate reasons. When it was first built, they didn't want to sell it. It didn't have good controls. It didn't work well on any platform. A year later, it finally came out on their own platform, but it's very hard to optimise. A PlayStation 5 auto-optimises itself. Generally runs about 40% quicker than the teraflops in it suggest, whereas to get the full 12 teraflops out of an Xbox requires programming for all the different mismatched bus speeds of the memory, and just, it's a nightmare. Basically, very few people are ever going to realise the 12 teraflops of power in an Xbox Series X, whereas the 10.2 teraflops of power in a PlayStation 5 just auto-realises that the programmer doesn't even have to be very good, and just the way the console culls information that's not going to go through the pipeline, and just, there's so much built into the silicon because it's not full RDNA. It was, the surgeon came along with a scalpel and cut out the bits that aren't needed for gaming, and then got feedback from Epic Games, the makers of the UnrealEngine, and they changed up the silicon in a PS5 over standard RDNA 2, and they half the evolution of what is RDNA 3, which is a 50% uptick in frame rate, was the design in the PlayStation, to the point where reps came forward and said, look, what you're seeing in the market isn't, Sony didn't use off-the-shelf parts. No. But you probably will see the technologies that we evolved come to market in the preceding years, but that doesn't mean we cheaped out, right? So RDNA 3, as it is on the PC, with a 50% uptick in frame rate, is all because of what is the hardware inside a PlayStation 5. So that the low little 10 teraflops equivalates to easily about 14 teraflops in real-world usage, because of the way it's engineered, because of the efficiency of its design. But Epic Games, Sony put hundreds of millions of dollars into Epic over a couple of transactions, and got feedback from Epic, who are building the new Unreal Engine, in terms of how to change that silicon. And it might be some feed-forward cache that might help with physics. The changes they made were substantial, and nobody talks about it. Everybody's like, oh, the Xbox is more powerful. Well, it's not true. And poor old Tango Gameworks, where they probably tried to up this game for the Xbox Series X, probably found that a lot of the PlayStation auto optimizations were making it a very hard task to do for some of the effects. Anyway, very impressive game. But yeah, stuck playing it on a PC platform. I must admit, I'm not a fan of PC gaming. It's too broken, arguably intentionally, and it's too much work. If I've got half an hour of game time on a Saturday morning and I want a game, I don't get that on a PC. I'm too busy troubleshooting it. Case in point, I probably lost a good few minutes this morning just to my Switch Pro controller. You can say, well, you don't need to use a Switch Pro controller. You can do what the evil bastards want you to do and go out and buy an Xbox controller. I've got 6 Xbox controllers in the house. But I don't want to support Microsoft with any money to them, ever. So that's just not going to happen. And they're not a good controller compared to a Switch Pro controller, which is one of the nicest controllers I've ever had the joy of gaming with. I don't know why I would give that up if I've got a couple of them in the house, right? Like, I'd rather use them. So, you know, is PC a fun ecosystem? Oh yeah, if you enjoy the hobby of servicing your machine, that's probably what this channel's all about. Probably about overclocking and just ways you can tweak your machine. Anyway, Fluid Motion Frames 2, for me, it's an AMD technology, the 6000 series of cards from the 6700 on up. With the extra RAM they've got, that third level cache, I think that RAM can be used. It might only be 80 meg or something, but 96 meg maybe in the 6700 XT, working up to 128 meg in the 6800s plus. But that series of cards, the RDNA 2s with that extra RAM, should be able to bust out Fluid Motion Frames really well. And it's such a game changer. For games like Hogwarts Legacy, being able to play that at really high resolution, everything maxed, and getting really high frame rate with VSync lock, and being able to fly around the Forbidden Forest and all the areas in the game, flying around the open world map where there'd be low frame rate transitions, and so you generally get VSync tearing and whatnot. It just, it wasn't much fun. I mean, it was fun. I'd play it for many, many hours, but to play it now and be able to play it fully maxed, it's just a much better experience. And the partner and I, we experienced it for a couple of hours. We flew around, and it wasn't the intention. We're only going to fly around on a broom for about 40 minutes. That's planned for 5 minutes, sorry. And at the 40-minute mark, still doing laps of the map, we're just like, oh my lord, this is so smooth. This is just, and it was just so addictive. And it was all because the VSync issues had gone at 60 frames a second. Fluid Motion Frames 2, whatever interpolation errors are being caused on the subframes, I don't see them, really. If my frame rate lows drop below 30 frames a second, maybe there might be a frame, if I'm specifically looking for it, generally with a pause screen, or if, I don't know, if I'm not paying attention to my game, and I'm just trying to look at, you know, bits of the screen, but you know, at that moment where you feel like you slow down and you can experience every frame of 60 frames a second, yeah, there might technically be some composition errors, but versus all the composition errors in the game that have always been there, which are now halved. Right? So if I walk in a room and the ray tracing is doing a light pass, but that first frame of a new room makes everything shine white, bright, like 000 value, sorry, 256 value, like literally pure white. At 30 frames a second, the persistence is twice as long as 60 frames a second. So now when I walk in a room, if there's a patch of white, because the game hasn't rendered the world quite quick enough as the door opens, which came with updates, the launch game didn't have it as a problem. You know, Nintendo Switch was the focus, and eventually the game got pulled down, and PC Ultra now is nothing compared to what PC Ultra was on launch. But all the same, you get this white flicker that wasn't there on start. They cheapened out the ray tracing to try and up performance for some whingers out there, I don't know. And sadly, they pulled down PC Ultra, which for the people who could brute force it and was enjoying it, it just means that for a year and a half, the game's just come down in quality, but, you know, standard affair, PC space. And anyway, the current version of the game at 60 frames a second is just so much better than the 30, and 30 is sadly what is about as good as I could brute force. If I brute force 30, I was basically sitting at 35 with the 1% lows at 31, 32 as my lows in the game, and so I might peak up to 50, but it's still not VSync, and it's still not very good. It just means my video card works really hard. So what I generally do is I set that 40 frame rate lock, so my game renders up to 40 frames, and then just takes a holiday. The video card doesn't try to draw 42 frames. It goes, no, I'm happy doing 40. And because I turn the motion doubling on, 40 becomes 80. And so really there's a little bit of fluctuation in that top 20 frames or so. Like it's generally hovering between 70 and 80 frames a second. But the low frame rate's still generally pushing out to 60. And so even if I turn the camera at a fast pan on a hard corner in an area transition, the fluidity of the frame is just fantastic. Anyway, it's something that I've been thoroughly enjoying, and just now being able to play games like this with a new lease on life, or just really experiencing the graphics in a nice way. Anyway, further footage, more so for me to proof. I need to check my recording levels, and that the white peaks are where they should be and stuff. Probably didn't want to have a rant negative against the platform holder, but just all the fighting this morning with control pads, the sort of stuff I generally don't want to have to talk about at all. You know, tell a happy story, everyone feels happy. Tell a shitty story, everyone kind of ends up feeling that way. I don't want to tell shitty stories. I do enjoy the hobby of PC platform gaming, if you will. They're constantly having to learn how to tweak it. They're constantly learning how to fight your platform. It's an education. It's what I've been receiving since the 80s. And yeah, it keeps me on my toes, I guess. I mean, I wouldn't give a child a gaming PC unless I knew it was a hobby, unless I knew I was giving them work, right? And having them make the machine work was the hobby, right? Like that's what it is. Once upon a time, you would argue you buy a gaming PC because you can also type documents on it, and it's a practical investment for your gaming dollars, and you don't have to pay the annual cost for network subscriptions, and the cost per game is a little bit lower and all that sort of stuff. But over the years, the cost per game being lower is kind of ameliorated in the market. But the benefit for how cheap a desktop PC can be, there's no need to try to funnel all the money into one project. And then the maintenance of the PC platform on an annual basis with regards to antivirus and the things you've got to do is more costly than any network subscription on a console. And then in a console market, you don't have to deal with the cheaters, and the cost per game license is such that your cheaters don't like just buy another free license of the game and come back in. Like, it's associated to their account, right? And that's got their trophies in it, so they've actually got some stake in it, and they don't. The cheating on the console is so much less, and then the multiplayer online is so much more filled. There's so much more. Like, you look at a game like Star Wars Battlefront, it's not active on PC. You can spend 8 hours trying to get a game going in multiplayer, but on console you just jump straight in. Like, that says everything about the console is a better ecosystem. And if it only comes down to frame rate differences and resolution differences between the games, then we're still experiencing the art team's design. We're still experiencing the gameplay, right? So gaming, yeah, I prefer console gaming. Right? Most people are unsubscribing. Yeah, I get. I'm not your typical crunchy PC channel, right? Like, I'm going to call it what it is, right? It's a failed ecosystem at the moment. That's typically called an Xbox license. It's the only reason why Microsoft lets it exist, because it claims every Windows install is an Xbox, and then it uses that number to convince developers that there's an active number of Xboxes in the world worth writing software for, that you might actually sell some software. And yeah, it's all nonsense. So PC is just it's never going to be allowed to shine more than the console. And even if you've got 3 times the grunt of an Xbox, you might at most get twice the frame rate, maybe, in a couple of sequences. Because Microsoft really don't want your PC to be effective. All that RAM, all that CPU, they've got lots of ways to gimp the PC platform, and there's this fear that they're going to do a gaming PC. Right? This is the end of the market. Right? Tell your friends, tell everyone. This is so anti-consumer, because we're talking here a company that will use forced driver updates to break equipment. Right? I bought a brand new productivity laptop earlier this year, and a forced BIOS update, forced driver update for my battery, stopped my battery charging, and wouldn't even let me run the computer plugged in, right? So that computer has the downtime of a couple of weeks being sent off and getting sent back and all that sort of stuff. But the Surface tablets work perfectly. So whenever Microsoft exists in an ecosystem where it sells hardware, and it can take out all the competitors by making their platforms less stable and more problematic, right? Like, we can say it's anti-consumer and whatnot, but Microsoft knows if it just spends more money in the legal system, eventually the person ruling on the case will just say, look, you both sides tell very convincing stories, and the truth is us legal practitioners don't really know the depth of what is real in the computer world. You know, so long as Microsoft knows that they can obfuscate the facts and bullshit at a legal level, such it'll get away with it, and it always has. Right? So this is just standard operating practice for a big, nasty company. And at the end of the day, it's gamers who suffer. And so, look, I do believe we vote with our wallets. We do need to raise conscientiousness on this. There are certain companies in the gaming ecosystems that we need to support, and they're the companies that generally support us. And look, that's what it comes down to, making your dollars valuable, right? It's not just your time that you invest in this hobby, right? It's also your money. And that might be hard-won money. You might have a job that you don't particularly enjoy working every single hour that you're there, and so that money, when you scurry it away, and you can finally enjoy whatever you spend that on, be it a holiday to an overseas country, or you want to have an escape in your own bedroom, and so you build a virtual world using a brand new video card. And if you want to get usage of that video card, if you buy in certain ecosystems, right, you're guaranteed every 18 months you're going to have to buy a new product. Or drivers will over time make your old products worse, and only the new products are going to be worth buying. And so any company that operates that way, there's a few of them, you just don't want to support them. We want to be conscientious consumers. We want to support companies that support open market technologies and just give everything for the end user. And they still turn their profits off the people who have the money. But it's not hard to give to the people without. And that's an attitude I've held since the 90s, where we all started downloading stuff off the net. And my attitude with regards to copy protection was that if the family I was giving a copy of music or software to was never going to buy the music or never going to buy the software, then my giving that family a copy of said software has cost the company nothing. Right? It's not a lost dollar in sales. Right? That family's so broke they can't afford meat on the dinner table at night time. But here's the thing, they might enjoy the game, they might enjoy the music, and when that artist puts out another album or that game company puts out another game, those people might be ready to buy it. I know with regards to Unreal Tournament, I bought that many times. Many times. But I ended up playing copied versions of it, I think they were easier to install, right? Even though I'd bought it. But when the new Unreal Tournament 2004 was coming out, right? Like I've got photo diaries of me going to the shop because the release date kept getting pushed back. But I'm all excited going to the shop to give them my money in day one, even if I don't plan on playing the new product. I'm going to go back to playing the old product because I love it. I just want to support good companies, right? And so I've always been that way. That a good company might get a pre-order or a day one purchase, full stop, every time. Whereas companies who don't look after consumers and have a bad rep, right? So I won't buy any more Bethesda upgrades or updates. I won't buy just about any title from Electronic Arts. Ubisoft is pretty much on warning. I generally won't touch their stuff. And it's sad to just blanketly write these companies off, right? But it's just there's so many other companies I can give my money to. There's so many other places I can focus in order to be happy. And that's what it comes down to. I choose the reality I live in, right? My somatic existence. Playing this game is fantastic. It's not my type of game. I have to turn the arachnophobia mode on. There's a horror mode light in the menus that you can actually turn on so that the scares aren't as bad as First Encounter Assault Reconnaissance. Fear, if anyone remembers that game, late 90s, early 2000s, Fear 2. First Encounter Assault Reconnaissance, I think it's what Fear stood for, F.E.A.R. Anyway, this game feels exactly like that. I wouldn't be surprised if team members had been on the same projects, but I'm not into horror games, so I play it in Crunchy Mode Light. But it's my freedom to choose to play games. It's my freedom to choose where I play my games. A game like this, which is purely just an eye candy test, this is a very beautiful game. It is a nice way to show off the PC. I did find I was getting DirectX errors in this game. In fact, generally my Microsoft titles, the Outer Worlds, anything that's been acquired by one of their studios, within a little while, the updates come through that break it on PC consistently. And you see it. So a first party like Forza Horizon 3, out the gate, is just the most gimped piece of PC software you can ever buy. But with the titles, with the companies that got acquired midway through production of their respective games, it's subsequent patches that then come in and make the game a little bit dodgy. Anyway, if I play Outer Worlds, all the Microsoft games are generally the worst of the worst. And they just have little gimpings in them that turn 10, or playground games, but turn 10, essentially the geniuses have now become Maverick, right? That name wasn't chosen by accident, Maverick, right? We're talking here Top Gun, we're talking here tactics, in a war. And so Microsoft uses lots of dirty tactics, right? They figured out the drive speed of the PlayStation's too quick. So it's like, okay, well, our CPU's a little bit quicker than theirs. So what we'll do is we'll zip all the data that needs to be loaded, right? And so as a zip, we can use a CPU to decompress the zip. So now we force the drive to load, but then there's a wait while the CPU unloads the module. And so if we don't use the Cracked architecture on the PlayStation, that allows them to have like 5 to 6 times the loading speed, or at least 4 times the speed, generally, of what the Xbox drive is capable of. You can load it using, if you save the files as, say, 4K file types, like little file types, all solid-state drives bomb out at certain file sizes, right? So if you choose the file size and then zip them, you can load it so that only the CPU advantage on one console ultimately leads to games loading a fraction quicker. And that's not the goal of the programmers, right? But the fact that they can level the playing field, they can take hardware that's literally 4 times quicker and make it so it performs not one iota better, right? This takes effort. And across the board, all the Microsoft companies and all their partners, so everyone that's in bed with them, which is Sega, sadly. I'm sad to see the alliances that have come out in this current. And don't make a mistake, it is a war. It's not one that we, the consumers, want to be part of or even know about, but it is. And gaming is right on the lines here. If Microsoft get their way, oh, gaming is going to really suffer. But in the meantime, whilst the war's going on, it's just dirty. There's casualties everywhere. Innocents are the people who are suffering, and that's what really sucks. It's not big corporations with lots of money. They might suffer, but nobody feels that. Nobody goes without food because of that. But if you're a gamer and you eat Weet-Bix for a month just because you're trying to buy a better video card, and then dirty tactics in the industry stop you from enjoying all that hard-earned savings, all that investment, right? That's when the innocent suffer, and that's my big beef. But look, PC gaming, it can be a beautiful thing. It's a great hobby, but probably a PlayStation 5 and a Nintendo Switch are the better platforms. In that hierarchical order of Switch being the most consumer ethical and just best. And then Sony, and yes, they do a lot of dodgy stuff, but that's just the culture that they are, right? Like, they don't, at the media level, defend all the accusations that come at them. They're very humble. And a lot of these stupid things they do it's just oversights. They're just too stupid. They're just, oh my lord, such a closed little company. They do silly things, and we see it. We see the operating system on their console just needing basic things to be done to it 4 or 5 years down the track, right? Consistently across the last couple of consoles. It's like, wow, they're still doing that wrong. But that's not insidious. That's not intentional mistakes. That's just silliness. That's stupidity. But then you go over to the competitors to them, and it's just combined with the accidental mistakes, the intentional errors. It's just too much, right? You just wind up with platforms that aren't reliable and are a nightmare, and certainly aren't entertaining, or they don't offer real practical value to we the consumers. But look, this was fueled two reasons this morning, because I wanted to add 2 millivolt more to my video card and just stabilise this game and make it work, which happened. I've been happy doing that. But with the difficulties of making that Switch Pro controller work, like in the last 4 days, the amount of time I've had to put in just to get it restarted, and if it goes to sleep, what you've got to do in terms of deleting it and re-adding it, just a nightmare. So yeah, is it hard to stick in the PC ecosystem when with the console I can just turn it on and it just works? Yep. And I say that as a 30-year PC technician, right, who's been overclocking gaming platforms since the 90s and is very confident and capable with what I'm doing. I prefer console gaming, right? But if you're going to stick it out on the PC platform, all the best, well wishes with you. And you probably, if you want to have a chat with me, leave a comment and I will help you on whatever project you're currently doing on the PC. More than happy. If you've listened to this video all the way through, you've invested this much time in me, you've got it back, right? I will give you half an hour of time, fully identifying your specific needs, right? So to drop a comment, put forward a situation, I'll address it in a video. We'll have some fun. Alrighty, for your time given here today, I say thank you. I can only hope this footage has been everything I want it to be. It's 4K, it's recorded at 30 frames a second, so in terms of catching out frame manipulation issues and whether motion's doubling fluid motion frames 2 is a perfect eye candy technique. I probably should have recorded at 60 frames a second with 120 the shutter speed on the camera, sorry, at double the frame rate to isolate frames perfectly. There's probably recording techniques. I've got in the last 4 days a whole bunch of different recordings at different frame rates and whatnot to catch out different things. This here was just a proof of concept of brightness and light, so important, colour and contrast. But yeah, it doesn't matter what game platform you play on. Get your TV sorted, get an HDR telly if you're going to play around with ray tracing. Otherwise, what are you doing? Why have you just spent $1,500 more buying a flagship card from the competitors? Because technically ray tracing might run a bit better. And then you run it on a standard def range telly at 240, monitor at 240 frames. I mean, that's good for pro gaming, but your ray tracing, right, this bragging rights to all your friends, doesn't look very good, right? If you go and then run the same TV, find a proper, true HDR10 capable television with 0 nits brightness at black value 000, which therefore claims infinite contrast range. If you can hit 800 nits with a 5% active window on the screen, like HDR10, thereabouts, claiming 1,000 nits of luminance at full brightness, but generally punching out about 700-800. It's pretty impressive. Right, and that extra contrast range, when you're rendering ray tracing to the screen, it all just makes sense. Right, and this game here, when it wasn't in HDR, it was just a visual eyesore, but when it's in HDR, the way the reflections build up at the brightness points on the screen feeling natural, it's just so easy to let the eyes just fall through the frame and make sense of what you're looking at. So yeah, if you're going to play around with ray tracing, get HDR. If you're going to play around on a PC, chat with me and we'll talk more. Okay, you be well.